Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. Today, we're tackling a case that really shook Vancouver back in the 80s,
Mm.
the Cindy James case. So get this, we're talking about a well-respected pediatric mental health nurse who, for years, endured this intense harassment, threats, and even some pretty violent attacks.
It's one of those cases that really gets under your skin and makes you wonder, like, what could be going on here? Was she targeted by, just like a relentless stalker, or is there something like way more complex, even darker going on?
Yeah, to kind of get to the bottom of this, we're turning to Case File, to True Crime Podcast, specifically episode 164, which
Yeah.
is all about Cindy James. And I think this one is really going to kind of stay with you guys.
Absolutely, and to really understand the depths of this mystery, we have to start with Cindy's life before the harassment began.
Okay, so what was her life like before things took this dark turn?
Well, on the surface, it seemed like Cindy had it all. She had a successful career as a pediatric mental health nurse. She was really dedicated to helping children. In fact, she was the founding director of this place called Blenheim House, which was a center for preschoolers with mental health needs.
Wow, it sounds like she was very dedicated to her work.
She was, but when kind of start to peel back the layers, there's a bit of a more complicated story there. She had a really difficult childhood, and it was marked by like a strict upbringing and some unsettling experiences. We're talking like recurring nightmares, a fear of the basement, and there are even hints of possible sexual abuse by one of her brothers.
Wow, yeah, that's some really heavy stuff.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how those experiences early on might have shaped her later in life.
It's definitely a possibility. And then there's her marriage to consider as well.
Right. She was married to psychiatrist Dr. Roy Makepeace, who was 18 years her senior. And if I remember correctly, their relationship wasn't exactly, sunshine and roses.
Yeah, you're right. It was a rocky marriage, and they eventually separated in 1982.
So we have this picture of Cindy as a really successful professional, but also with a lot of, I guess, personal baggage. Do you think any of this could offer clues to what happened, as the harassment unfolded?
It's hard to say for sure, but past trauma can definitely manifest itself in really unexpected ways.
Okay, so let's get into the timeline of the harassment.
Yeah.
I know it starts with some pretty, I guess you could say, classic stalker
Yeah.
behavior, right?
Yeah, it begins in 1982 with those classic menacing phone calls, like the heavy breathing, whispered threats, that sort of thing.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
But didn't it escalate pretty quickly from there?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The phone calls were just the beginning. We're talking break-ins, a pillow slashed with like surgical precision, just to name a few. Initially, the police didn't really do a whole lot, that they seemed to kind of dismiss it. But as the harassment kept going, a young constable, Pat McBride, he actually moved in with Cindy to, protect her. And they actually ended up getting romantically involved.
Wow. Okay, so we have a police officer living with the victim. That's got to complicate things, right?
You would think, but it didn't stop there. The harassment continued. Even after she changed her number and moved, it just kept happening. And it got even weirder.
What do you mean? Like, what happened?
So notes start appearing with Cindy's image from magazines, but her eyes are scratched outright. And then a dead cat is left in her yard with this note that says, like, "You're next."
Whoa, that's chilling. So this stalker wasn't playing around. They were really sending a clear message.
Yeah, exactly. The sheer persistence of it, and just the escalating nature of it, it created this atmosphere of, just constant fear for her. And she had no idea who was behind it or when they would strike again.
It's like she was living in a nightmare. And this brings us to Ray Makepeace, her ex-husband. He seems to be kind of a wild card in all of this.
Yeah, he really is. I mean, he was a psychiatrist, right? So you'd think he'd be the voice of reason and all this, but his behavior was, I guess you could say, a little suspicious.
What makes you say that?
Well, for starters, his car was seen, around her house during some of these incidents, and then he had this theory that the mafia was involved, which, just struck a lot of people as kind of a strange, explanation.
A mafia connection. Yeah, that does seem a little out there, especially in a case like this. Was there anything else?
Yeah, Cindy claimed that Roy had been abusive during their marriage. So, I mean, that's a major red flag, right?
So we have Roy, the ex-husband. He might have a motive. He's acting a little strange, and he's being accused by Cindy. it's not looking good for him.
No, not really. But we're really just getting started here. There's so much more to uncover.
Okay, so we left off with Roy Makepeace looking um, like a pretty strong suspect.
Yeah.
But you said there's more to it, right? What else makes his role in all this so, I don't know, complex?
Well, you got to remember that Cindy continued to see Roy socially even after accusing him of abuse.
That's right. You'd think if you thought your ex was behind years of terror, you wouldn't exactly be going to, get coffee with him.
Yeah, exactly. So it makes you wonder if maybe those accusations were accurate, or if maybe there was something else going on in that relationship that we're not seeing.
Yeah. So much of this hinges on, I guess, how reliable Cindy was, as a narrator of her own experiences. But her behavior in that first attack, the one with the slashed pillow and the locked doors, it doesn't really add up.
Yeah, that one is it's a head scratcher. On the one hand, you have Cindy claiming she was attacked in her own home, but then you have these details that don't really make sense, like the doors being locked from the inside.
And the police seem to think that Cindy was actually behind it. What evidence did they have to back that up?
Well, those polygraph tests she took after that first attack. Well, they asked her if she had inflicted those injuries on herself, and she said no. But the polygraph indicated deception.
But aren't polygraphs notoriously unreliable?
Yeah, you're right. They're not foolproof. Even Detective Boyer Smith, who was, leading the investigation, he actually had doubts about the results. He thought that maybe her nervousness and her emotional state could have skewed the readings.
So the polygraph is basically inconclusive. What else were they looking at?
Well, they also pointed to inconsistencies in her story. Initially, she said the attack happened in her garage, but then later she said it was inside the house.
Well, I mean, if I was being harassed and threatened, I imagine I'd be pretty confused too. Did she explain why she changed her story?
She did. She said she was too afraid to tell the truth at first because the attacker had threatened her family.
Okay, well, yeah, I can understand that. But, I mean, it still makes it really difficult to know what actually happened that night.
Absolutely. And then there's that whole thing with the locked doors. Constable Kikama, he responded to the, emergency call, and he actually testified that he'd never, seen a crime scene where the attacker had, cleaned up blood and locked the doors before taking off. It's pretty unusual.
Because we're going with the police's logic.
Yeah.
She, drugged and injured, managed to lock herself in.
Yeah, that was their theory. But it does seem, kind of hard to believe, given how bad the attack was. It's just one of those things that makes this whole case so confusing.
And then there were those arson attacks, right? Yeah. Her house was set on fire a bunch of times.
Yeah, and those fires are another piece of the puzzle, trying to figure out if she was a victim or if she was setting these things up herself. And the fires, especially the one in 1984, don't really make it easy to come to a solid conclusion.
What was so weird about that fire?
Well, the fire started in the basement, but there was no sign of forced entry. The basement window, which would have been a way to get in, it was covered in undisturbed dust and cobwebs.
But if they didn't break in, how they even start the fire?
Right. That's the big question. The investigators found that the fire had multiple points of origin, and it seemed like it was started using stuff from the basement bathroom, like a toilet paper roll and a magazine.
So going with the self-harm theory, why would she set her own home on fire? What would be the reason?
It's impossible to say for sure, but some people have suggested that maybe she was seeking attention or even trying to frame Roy.
But her friends and family, they were really against that. They were adamant that she wouldn't do something like that. They pointed to that witness, Tom Woodcock, who saw a man running away from Cindy's house during one of the fires, right?
Right, and that man was never identified. It's just another detail that makes this case so hard to figure out.
And we can't forget about Roy. I mean, it sounds like he endured years of suspicion and scrutiny from the police. What was his take on all this?
Well, Roy always said he was innocent. He denied any involvement in the attacks. He talked about their early years as being really happy, but, sadly, their relationship fell apart.
Did he have any explanation for the evidence that seemed to point to him, like his car being seen or the allegations of abuse?
Yeah, he did address those points at the inquest. He said that he had slapped her twice, but it was out of frustration, and he really regretted it. But he insisted that he was never physically abusive. And as for the car, he said that he was just concerned for her and was checking on her from a distance.
What about the that cabin murder Cindy described under hypnosis? Did he have anything to say about that?
Yeah, he actually challenged that account directly. He pointed out that Cindy's sister, Melanie, who was supposedly there during that boat trip, she never backed up that story. She actually denied ever seeing anything like that.
So another hole in her story.
It would seem that way. And Roy also had an explanation for that word, homog, that Cindy remembered from one of the abductions. He said that it was probably a misremembered Zulu word, humbok, which means like farewell, take care. And apparently his sister used to say that all the time.
It's interesting that he seemed to have an answer for so many of the things that seemed to make no sense. You think he was just trying to, I don't know, make sense of her behavior?
Yeah, maybe. Roy was convinced that Cindy had multiple personality disorder, which is, known as dissociative identity disorder now. And he said that her erratic behavior and memory lapses and the inconsistencies in her stories, it was all because of this disorder. He even said that maybe her use of a black nylon stocking in the attacks could be linked to some kind of, childhood trauma.
So basically, he saw her as a victim of her own mind.
Yeah, that's how he saw it. He genuinely believed that she wasn't, really in control of her actions.
What about those creepy phone messages left on his answering machine? The ones that threatened to waste her. Weren't those a big deal in the investigation?
Yeah, they were. Those messages really threw things for a loop. Some people, including Roy himself, thought the voice was male, but others, like the police, thought it was Cindy disguising her voice. They even did, a voice analysis, but it was inconclusive.
Hmm. So another unsolved piece.
Exactly. Those messages, like so many other things in this case, they just remain a mystery.
Well, with all this back and forth, no wonder the jury at the inquest couldn't decide what happened. They're basically stuck between two possibilities, neither of which could be proven.
Yeah, exactly. They had to decide if she was, murdered, if she died by suicide, or if she orchestrated that last attack herself. And in the end, they just said undetermined, which, given how tangled the evidence is and all the unknowns in Cindy's story, is probably the most honest answer they could come up with.
It's frustrating, for a case that went on for so long and with so much suffering. But it seems like even after all this time, it's going to remain a real enigma.
It is. This case really shows you how much we don't understand. We can go over the evidence, we can listen to everyone's stories, but sometimes we may never know for sure.
It really is hard to wrap your head around, like a case like this where there are just so many unanswered questions.
Mhm.
But even though the inquest couldn't say for sure what happened to Cindy, I wonder if there are other parts of this story that maybe we can shed some light on. Like, there were those times when she was under police surveillance, and if I remember right, the harassment actually stops during those periods.
Yeah, that's something that comes up a lot, when people talk about this case. It's true that whenever Cindy was, being watched by the cops, those phone calls and letters, they would just like disappear.
It's almost like whoever was doing this knew when to back off,
Yeah.
which is kind of scary when you think about it. Because if she was behind it all, you'd think it would have just kept going, whether she was being watched or not.
Right. Yeah. Makes you wonder if maybe there was like someone else out there calling the shots.
And then you have the people who knew her best, right? Her family and friends. They insisted that she was genuinely scared and that she would never, make all this stuff up.
Yeah, they were totally convinced that she was a victim. They'd bring up things like, remember that guy, Tom Woodcock, who saw a man running away from her house during one of the fires? And there was that weird thing with Roy where two guys showed up at his apartment and, seemed to be trying to intimidate him.
Oh, right. And Roy thought those guys were somehow connected to the whole harassment thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if she was supposedly faking everything, why would she involve her ex like that, so directly? I mean, that could have been dangerous for him.
Yeah, that doesn't really line up with the whole, self-harm idea either. And speaking of things that don't add up, do you remember that phone call to her life insurance company after she disappeared?
No, remind me.
So someone called the company claiming to be Cindy's father and asked for info about her policy, but her father said it wasn't him.
Okay, yeah, that's just creepy. It definitely sounds like someone else was involved, someone who knew enough about her to impersonate her dad.
Exactly. It's just another one of those things that keeps bringing you back to the idea that maybe she wasn't doing this all alone.
We spent a lot of time talking about all the incidents and everything, but I think it's important to also consider Cindy's mental state.
Yeah.
She had quite a few diagnoses over the years, right?
Yeah, she saw a bunch of psychiatrists and got a whole range of diagnoses. We're talking anxiety, depression, paranoid disorder, psychotic delusions, even suicidal thoughts.
So lots of possible explanations for her behavior,
Mm.
but no real agreement.
Yeah, pretty much. One of her old psychiatrists thought she might have borderline personality disorder and PTSD, probably from her, you know, rough childhood.
Which, yeah, makes sense given everything we know about her past.
But he also said that Cindy was really private, so it was hard to get close to her and really understand, what was going on.
We do have those journal entries, though,
Yeah.
right? Which,
Well,
give us a little window into what she was going through emotionally.
yeah, and in those entries, she talks about, uh, feeling really despairing, hopeless, even wanting to end her life.
It's really tough to read those words knowing how it all ended for her.
It is, but those same journals also talk about the harassment. She was frustrated with the police and scared that no one believed her.
So we're seeing these two sides of her, the woman who's, struggling and the woman who's desperate to convince everyone that she's in danger.
Right, yeah. And that's maybe the saddest part of this whole story. Even if she was responsible for some of what happened, she clearly needed help.
It's a sad reminder that even people who seem successful and, have it all together, they can be dealing with stuff we know nothing about.
And sometimes those things can lead them to some really, dark places. That inquest with its undetermined verdict, it really shows how complicated this case was. And we're left with this feeling that we'll probably never really know what happened.
The whole story really makes you think about how we, as a society, respond to people who are struggling, especially when they're, saying they're victims.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Cindy was a respected nurse. She dedicated her life to helping people, and yet it seems like she kind of slipped through the cracks.
Like somewhere along the line, those cries for help were just missed or misunderstood.
The Cindy James case also shows how difficult it is to investigate these stalking cases. When the victim's, credibility is questioned, it can be really, really hard to get to the truth.
It's a tough situation. You have to take the victim seriously, but you also have to consider all the possibilities, even the ones that are, hard to think about.
It's a cautionary tale. It reminds us that there are cases out there that just might never have a clear answer.
Yeah. We might never know for sure if Cindy James was a victim or if she was the one behind it all, or maybe a little bit of both. But her story, it sticks with you.
It does. It makes you think about, how complicated people can be and how much we don't understand, and the fact that some mysteries just might never be solved.
It's definitely a deep dive we won't forget anytime soon.
Uh,
Thanks for walking us through this really intricate and thought-provoking case.
yeah, of course. Glad to be here.
And to you, our listeners, we hope this deep dive gave you, something new to think about when it comes to the Cindy James case. What are your thoughts? What really stood out to you? Let us know. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.